Love conquers all. Let us, too, yield to love. These strains ye shall make of highest worth in Gallus' eyes, Gallus, for whom my love grows from hour to hour, as fast as the green alder shoots up when spring is young. Let us arise. Get home, my full-fed goats, get home. The evening star draws on. In the 3.5 main quest, it has been confirmed that the trajectory of the Amphoreus plot does, in fact, follow Prometheus Bound by Aeschylus, just as I had predicted in 2.7. Notably, it has been made perfectly clear that Lycurgus was the Prometheus Bound in a cave. But what does that mean for Lycurgus and for the story? What does Quatorzain algebraic expression mean? And what is the true nature of the cave binding our Prometheus? In the original play by Aeschylus, Prometheus Bound centers around the imprisonment of Prometheus by Zeus. Once upon a time, there was chaos in the cosmos, so in Amphoreus, our chaos is named Chaos. In the chaos, the primordial gods were born. Among them, Uranus, or in our case, Oronix, ruled above them all. The primordial gods gave birth to the 12 Titans, who proceeded to overthrow Uranus under the leadership of the youngest Titan, Cronus, who became Kephale, the Sky Father here. Cronus and the Titans then gave birth to the 12 Olympian gods, who overthrew the 12 Titans under the leadership of Zeus in a parallel of the previous generation usurping their forefathers. This event is called Titanomachy. Most, like Arc the Titan messenger god, betrayed Zeus and supported Cronus. A few, like Styx, Helios, and Selene, assisted Zeus all along, while some, like Oceanus, stood aside and did nothing. And then, there is Prometheus, who initially supported Cronus, but, thanks to his mother Themis' gift of foresight, decided to switch sides to Zeus. After Titanomachy, all the Titans and gods who supported Cronus were jailed by Zeus in Tartarus. However, in a twist of event, Prometheus learned that Zeus had a plan to destroy humanity. To counter the plan, Prometheus stole the divine flame and gave it to humans. As a result of his action, humanity developed reasons, agriculture, language, arts, medicine, and science. In other versions of the story, Prometheus even became the creator god of humanity, stealing rationality from Athena to create humans. Naturally, because of his theft, Prometheus was subsequently thrown into Tartarus by Zeus, cursed to forever have his liver eaten by an eagle, forever regenerating, forever being tortured. In Amphoreus, this became Phainon stealing the golden blood of Nanook by committing the first murder, dooming the fate of Amphoreus with his original sin, condemning himself to the eternal fate of hunting himself under a sheep mask. Although, Prometheus still had a card hidden up his sleeves. At this point in time, our Prometheus in Amphoreus has turned into Lycurgus. He knew the content of a prophecy foretelling Zeus' death, sure that as long as he waited for the 1 in 33 million chances, he would one day win, as the infinite monkey at the typewriter trying to write the complete Shakespeare. In Tartarus, Hephaestus, who should correlate to Gyrios here, tried to compel Prometheus to cough up the prophecy on the order of Zeus, but Prometheus continued to refuse him and prophesied that Zeus would be in danger and be forced to make amends with him again. Eventually, Hephaestus left and Oceanus arrived. Oceanus, who is Phagusa and Hysilens here, argued that he could convince Zeus to repeal his sentence if Prometheus stopped speaking ill of Zeus. Obviously, Prometheus did not listen and reminded Oceanus of the fate of Atlas, the Titan fated to carry the world on his shoulder forever because he resisted Zeus during Titanomachy, and whom Phainon has become here. Eventually, Oceanus left too. And this is where Prometheus Bound and Prometheus Unbound diverged from each other. Of all the romantic works featuring a rewrite of Greek myths, one stood out as an exemplar example that also heavily features Prometheus. That work is called Prometheus Unbound, a closet drama by Percy Bysshe Shelley. It is basically a fanfic continuation of the original Prometheus Bound, but at the same time, it's also a fix-it fanfic. If the original drama supports Zeus and wrote a happy ending between Zeus and Prometheus, with the Demogorgo aborted, then Prometheus Unbound wrote the opposite. Zeus was wrong, Prometheus was right, and the Demogorgo must be born to cover the world with love. In what remains of Aeschylus' Prometheus series, The Oceanids arrived to chide Prometheus, reminded him of his marriage to their sister, Asia, and affirmed their loyalty to Zeus. And then they left again. Io, a mortal woman pursued by Zeus, wandered in and complained about Zeus. Prometheus then appeared before her and told her the future of her descendants. Io's pain would end at the Nile, and Zeus would restore her. Her descendants would include a line of kings and a hero who would rescue Prometheus from his torment, Heracles. At the end of Prometheus Bound, Hermes arrived to urge Prometheus to cough up the prophecy, but he didn't, and that was that. After Prometheus Bound, Aeschylus also wrote two continuations, Prometheus Unbound and Prometheus Firebringer. From the remaining fragments of the two works, we know that in his 11th labor, Heracles arrived at the Garden of Hesperides at the end of the river Oceanus, and fought the dragon laden to steal the golden apple of the garden. In Amphoreus, this golden apple of the Garden of Hesperides is currently in the possession of Aglaea. Presumably, the dragon laden under the tree is Thanatos, one half of which did study at the grove and worked for said Hesperid in possession of the golden apple. One half of Heracles, Phainon, did try to steal that golden apple, but his effort was foiled by the laden dragon. That golden apple will play a big role later on. From the garden, Heracles made his way to the Caucasus and killed the Aquila eagle, torturing Prometheus, rescuing Prometheus, fulfilling the prophecy of Prometheus. Incidentally, in some versions, Heracles also managed to free Atlas from his punishment by using some boulders, while in others, Heracles only tricked Atlas to get the apple for him and then ran away. It's pretty obvious to see that the Heracles who is supposed to free Atlas and take on his boulder is Mighty, the other person in the role of Heracles in the Amphoreus story, and who is also dismembered into many different pieces. From what little we know of the lost work, at the end of Prometheus Firebringer, Zeus and Prometheus supposedly reconciled, and Prometheus finally coughed up the prophecy to Zeus, and the content was as such. In the future, Zeus would marry the sea nymph Thetis, whose son would depose his father, like what Zeus had done to Cronus and what Cronus had done to Uranus. As with the proper history as told in the Iliad, Thetis ended up marrying Peleus because Zeus knew of the prophecy and dodged the bullet. She then had a son, Achilles, who was dipped into the Styx by his mother so that he would become invulnerable. Except she missed a spot that became his Achilles' heels, literally. In any case, happy ending, and Zeus didn't die in Aeschylus' play. This is the version of the myth that has happened so far in the Amphoreus plotline for 33550-337 eternal recurrences that we have seen from 3.0 to 3.5. If Phainon, the unborn possibility for Achilles and Heracles, is relegated to the role of Patroclus across 33 million loops, then Meidiamos is always born as the son of Peleus, bearing the fate of strife, participating in the Amphoreus Trojan War, always losing his life in the process. Obviously, this is very much not the case with Percy Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. Unlike the Prometheus in Aeschylus' play, Percy Shelley's Prometheus never revealed the truth of the prophecy to Zeus. Thus, in this version of the story, Thetis married Zeus instead of Peleus, and the child of prophecy, the Demogorgon, was born, sealing the fate of Zeus. As a result, he was abandoned in a cave, from which he would eventually emerge as the usurper of Zeus' throne, as the return of love to the world. After Hermes failed to convince Prometheus to cough up the prophecy, the Furies, also known as the Erinyes, and incidentally the inspirations for Phryna and Erinyes in Gentian, attacked Prometheus. They told him that after he gave humanity fire and culture, they turned to violence and war against each other. One man tried to preach hope and peace, they said, but he was driven away, his message distorted by humans for the sake of wars. Prometheus wept for this man, but did not reveal his name. And of course, this man is our Demogorgon, whose story was split between Irontomb, Evernight, Phainon, and Zephyro. In different versions of Gnosticism, the Demiurge is either the reflection of Sophia in the abyss or a child of Sophia when she tried to emanate alone without her counterbalance, Logos. When I first introduced this topic in my 2.7 prediction video, I assumed that the Demogorgon is Phainon and Sophia is Cyrene, which turned out to be true, but it's also more complicated than that. By 3.5, it has been rendered pretty clear that Hoyo has made use of both versions of the story for Irontomb, Evernight, and Phainon. For the Irontomb, Lycurgus was its mother Sophia, attempting to create the fall of the Erudition without the participation of his creation, Muse. For Evernight, she is a reflection of Mach in the Abyss, exactly like how the Herrscher of Corruption is the Demiurge for Alicia in Honkai 3. Presumably, like the Herrscher of Corruption, Evernight also aims to preserve the Trailblaze forever in her eternal dream, because that design and background music are surely for an antagonist.
一枚滚烫的火种，一场交易的注脚，它承载着期许和整个世界的热烈，往昔的涟漪。是他把这团火藏进了岁月的长河，期待心愿能够跨越时间，送往未来的你手中。现在，带着它回去吧，亲爱的伙伴。回到翁法罗斯，扭转最后的再创世，去见证那段为救世主驻足的岁月，在转瞬即逝的漫长纪元里，永不屈服于毁灭命运的抗争。然后，就用这枚被记忆祝福的火种，回应他们的期许，开拓未来吧。而我会在时间的角落静静注视，等待下一场邂逅的到来。我相信，那不会花上太久。
For Phainon, he is the Demiurge who is a reflection of Nanook in the Abyss, but at the same time, he is the divine child under the care of Ilethia in the cave, for Amphoreus itself is the part of Mach's memories that she had forgotten. Between the three Demiurge, even though their dispositions are different, they both fundamentally originated from the same Gnostic figure, and, as the instigators of the eternal recurrences, they both are tied to the material world, imprisoning Sophia and the humans born of Sophia's light in denial of enlightenment. However, there is one more Demogorgon figure in Amphoreus, and that is the eyeless lion, the original Nicodor. In the hypostasis of the Archons, the Demiurge is a product of matter created by Sophia and compared to an aborted fetus. He is androgynous, a plastic form molded out of shadow, an arrogant beast resembling a lion. The Pistis Sophia further clarifies that the Demiurge is an archon of chaos, whose one half was fire and one half was darkness. So you can see where Phainon's Reaver plot came from. Phainon was fire, and Reaver was darkness. As the chaos of the story, Phainon is the literal archon of chaos, and I'm pretty sure Fans is the same over in Genshin 2. In the Origin, he is associated with both the Phainon star and Ariel, which is another name for the angel Michael, who is fated to battle with Samuel in Judaism and Christianity. And here is where it gets interesting. As far as naming goes, Zephyro is a clear nod to the Greek god of the west wind, Zephyrus. As a god of the west wind, Zephyrus was a suitor of Hyacinthus, together with Apollo. However, Hyacinthus chose Apollo, and Zephyrus got jealous. As Hyacinthus played discus with Apollo, Zephyrus blew his breath of death, killing the youth. And so, Zephyrus is also known as a god of death, as much as he is a god of wind. In Amphoreus, this became the land of the west wind that every character talks about when they're about to die, and since Zephyro is directly here in Amphoreus, it is pretty easy to see that Amphoreus, where everyone is secretly dead all along and only exists as memories in a simulation, an Elysian realm, is the exact land of west wind that everyone was talking about, unaware that they had already died long ago. In other versions of the myth, Zephyrus is one of the gods mourning for the fall of Phaeton into the river Eridanos, who is one of the inspirations for Phainon in Amphoreus. In his passion for driving, Phaeton, the son of Helios, ventured to mount his father's chariot, but because he did not keep a firm rein, he came to grief and fell into the Eridanos. Now the youth is thrown from the chariot, and is falling headlong, for his hair is on fire, and his breasts smoldering with the heat. His fall will end in the river Eridanos, and will furnish this stream with a mythical tale. For swans scattered about, breathing sweet notes, will hymn the youth, and flocks of swans rising aloft will sing the story to Castros and Istros, nor will any place fail to hear the strange story. And they will have Zephyros, the west wind, nimble god of wayside shrines, to accompany their song, for it is said that Zephyros has made a compact with the swans to join them in the music of the dirge. However, Zephyrus isn't his only name. His Chinese name, Phainon, means burning wind, which is actually a reference to another wind of death, the burning poisonous wind in the Arabian Peninsula. In Islamic tradition, this wind of burning poison is the source from which Iblis was created. For context, Iblis is also known as Samel, an epithet of Satan, and Azazel, the angel of death, and the place where the scapegoat is sent to after its sacrifice on the altar. And it just so happens that the angel Michael, our demiurge of chaos with one half of fire and one half of darkness, is locked into a battle against Zephyro, as Samel here. If Phainon as Michael, the angel with the flaming sword, can't defeat Samel, then he cannot escape the firmament of Amphoreus to reach the gods. But at the same time, it means that not only is Phainon a demiurge or a Phainon star to Amphoreus, he himself can also be analyzed as a Sophia to Zephyro's demiurge. After all, the demiurge is supposed to have two sides. One half was fire and one half was darkness. Just as the lion face stole the power of Sophia, imprisoning her in the material world, so, too, does the eyeless lion, the original Nicodor, in the Styxia nymph quest scroll toward Kephae. To open the gates of the past, one must abide by the sacrificial rite. The eyeless lion questions, what is the limit of everything in this world? The wise at the banquet replies, the human soul. And so, he curled up at the altar, hugging his knees with a window high over his head. He stared at the lion's sharp fangs and offered his soul. The first to disappear were his hands that worked tirelessly, then his legs that measured the earth, until his torso that held his body together shattered. His head continued to murmur. In a way, while Phainon is definitely the Phainon star to Amphoreus during his eternal recurrences, in the grander scale of the Amphoreus experiment, as the land of the west wind where his gravestone lies, he is also the sleeping Kephae, or in this case, the sleeping Sophia, the fire half of the demiurge, the Phainon who had fallen into the aridness of nihility, kept in his dream by the darkness half of the demiurge, Zephyrus of the west wind, the eyeless lion, the original Nicodor. In other words, the sheep is wearing lion skin, while the lion is wearing sheepskin. Ultimately, Phainon and Midiamos have always competed for the same role, from Heracles to Achilles and Patroclus to Siegfried, and of course, for the role of the Demogorgon in Prometheus Unbound too, and it really shows in their sheer amount of lore inspirations they share together. So to sum it all up, we have approximately 4 demiurge here: Irontomb, Evernight, Phainon, and Zephyro, all serving as nods to their respective versions of Gnosticism and Prometheus' story. It's easy to see that Irontomb is the aborted Demogorgon in Aeschylus' Prometheus Bound, while Evernight is the equivalence of the Hersher of corruption, the mirrored reflection in the Abyss version of the Demiurge, to Cyrene and Mach. For Phainon and Zephyro, the eyeless lion and the original Nicodor, they are best interpreted as their own pairing of Sophia and Demiurge, two halves of the same circle, one half of fire and one half of darkness, as eternal nemeses of golden blood, lion and oryx locked in an eternal battle. Presumably, together they will function as Percy Shelley's Demiurge. While Gnosticism has a less than stellar view of the Demiurge, Percy Shelley's interpretation of the Demiurge, or Yahweh, is much closer to that of the other Abrahamic religions as a force of good in the world. In this specific case, the Demogorgon was the true good in contrast to Zeus, who is both good and evil. The Demogorgon was the child of Zeus that was better than Zeus, the lone man who preached for peace and love, but was ignored and distorted by humanity. In Prometheus Unbound, as Prometheus refused to cough up the prophecy to Zeus and Oceanus left the jail, he was left to the company of his sisters-in-law, Ione and Panthea. As oppositions to the Furies who tormented Prometheus for the Enlightenment movement he brought, Asia, Ione, and Panthea, the three sea nymphs and daughters of Oceanus, are their opposites, offering Prometheus comfort and calling for Prometheus to return to the romantic Mother Nature. Asia, who had been exiled to the Indian valleys after Prometheus was imprisoned by Zeus. As a representation of love from the romantic movement, Panthea reminded Prometheus of the love of his wife Asia, who, to the Prometheus Hysilens being tormented by the Panthea Lycurgus, is the dead Saridra, but who to the Prometheus Lycurgus being tormented by the Panthea Hysilens is probably us, and no, I won't take no for an answer. At the end of Act 1, the incarnation of the earth told Prometheus of the fall of Babylon and of the Magus Zoroaster. In real life, Zoroaster was the prophet and founder of Zoroastrianism. This role was taken up by Anaxa in Amphoreus as the mirror of Lycurgus as Prometheus, but I will elaborate on that later on. For now, as a mirror of Prometheus for the Enlightenment movement, Zoroaster saw his own image in the garden, signaling that there are two realities, the life where he was tormented and the death underneath the grave, where there is the shadow of the Demogorgon, where he will be reunited with the eternal love of Asia once more. At the start of Act 2, as Prometheus was left tormented in his allegory of the cave, Panthea and Asia left to seek the child of the prophecy, the Demogorgon in a cave. In other words, if the parallelism holds true, then the Amphoreus version of Panthea and Asia, Hysilens and the Trailblazer, will go into a cave to look for Phainon once more in the future. In the cave, the Demogorgon told her that even gods are subjected to the rule of eternal love. At the end, the Demogorgon rose into heaven and dragged Zeus down to the cave, killing him. Heracles rescued Prometheus, reuniting him with his wife, Asia. They went into a cave together. With Zeus dead, humanity stopped waging wars and abandoned the greed for power. The earth and the moon were reborn with life as Demogorgon's message of love reverberated throughout the universe. Love, joy, victory, and empire. As you can see, the story of Amphoreus so far has stayed pretty close to Prometheus Bound and the first act of Prometheus Unbound. Some details did get shuffled, but overall, the plot of 3.5 is literally just Lycurgus bound in a cave, Hysilens as the jailer Oceanus and the co-prisoner Panthea, Saridra, Herta, and Scrollum as the Furies who tormented Lycurgus with the fruit of the enlightenment of his own making, Asia as the MC who got exiled midway through the story, Anaxa as the Magus Zoroaster who saw of two realities, Cyrene as the spirit of the earth and the moon reborn with life at the end of the story, presumably as March Pro Max, my Diamos as not the Achilles with his fatal flaw but as the immortal Heracles of this cycle. Having gained the perfect immortality of Heracles at the cost of his sanity, and Phainon as the Demogorgon, hiding in a cave off-screen with the black tides. It's pretty on the nose, especially when Hoyo literally spelled it out in an achievement. At the same time, as I have mentioned above, there are multiple Demiurge in the story, from Evernight to the Irontomb to Phainon and to Zephyro, each correlating to a different version of the figure in Gnosticism and literature beyond Prometheus Unbound, so there are still mysteries to be uncovered here. Of course, the most pressing questions are evidently about Zeus and the cave itself. As in, who is the tyrant Zeus to be dethroned by the Demiurge here? And what, exactly, is the cave of Amphoreus outside of the allegory, in the eximyth of the Enlightenment movement? To answer these questions, we must venture beyond the myths, to view everything from the eximyth of math and physics. In classical physics that we studied in high school, space and time can be imagined as 4 dimensions expressed by 4 different axes in a tesseract. However, in quantum physics, Minkowski had introduced a different way of viewing time as a space-time continuum in the shape of a light cone. In the Minkowski diagram, all 3 space axes of x, y, and z undergo the Lorentz transformation and are expressed as the horizontal axis, while the vertical axis is still time. As a result, space and time as a single continuum can be expressed as a light cone, centering around a single point, the present. Translated into English, the light cone is defined by the speed of light as it moves from the statistical probability of all events that could have happened to create the present, to the statistical probability of all possible futures that could branch out from the present. Beyond the walls of the light cone is elsewhere the probability that cannot be reached by particles moving slower than light. Hence, in Honkai Star Rail, the Remembrance's light cone is a package of solidified phenomena. Its power is sealed in slices of light. It is the Seed of Time, a book in the vast library of Fuli, carefully selected to become the basis for the new universe after every reset of the finality. But back to the math, the coordinates of events can be expressed in this form on the screen in the Minkowski diagram. S is the space-time interval between two events, x, y, z are the three coordinates of space, and t is the coordinate of time. In other words, S is effectively analogous to the distance between 2 points on the graph in 2D space, just that each point is called 4 vector here. By measuring the distance between two events, we can determine whether the two events are in the same light cone, thereby determining whether the two events have a causal relationship or not. In other words, in the context of Honkai Star Rail, the light cones of the Remembrance are the ways they can restrict the past and the future of the universe in accordance to a predetermined end, albeit one with a minor margin of error within the light cones themselves. In effect, they're pretty much the Hoyo version of the quantum time lock mechanics of the Fate world building. At the same time, because of the nature of the light cone as a probability game, you can also kinda analyze time as we perceive them to be not real. This understanding is called the timeless interpretation of the universe. Originally, the idea that absolute time doesn't exist was postulated by Mach as a criticism of the classical understanding of time as a river unaffected by anything. In ancient Greece, Heraclitus stated that you can't step in the same river twice, and Newtonian physics believed that time is an absolute, unchanging river. However, Mach had a different idea and proposed that, in oversimplified terms, matters determine time. This idea actually inspired Einstein to create his theory of relativity, and he called this view of time as relative to the observer Mach's principle. With the discovery of time dilation and Einstein's theory of relativity, Minkowski created the light cone as a way to express space-time continuum, in which history, as in the distance between two events, is but a game of probability. Building up on this, Julian Barber argued that time as we perceive it is nothing more than an illusion. In his argument, he posited that history is, in truth, just moving from one instant or now to the next in the probability mist of the light cone, and time is just how our brain processes the inertia of moving from one instant to another. In other words, in Barber's argument, time isn't real and history only exists in our memories. An important thing to note is that this timeless model isn't exactly mainstream, but overall, needless to say, it's quite easy to see that Hoyo pretty blatantly used this idea of time as a series of instant to create Nous Instant in our fantasy space opera. In Honkai Star Rail, the concept of instant is extrapolated by Nous. By anchoring the instants into the universe, Nous has created the circle of knowledge that locks all knowledge within the path of erudition. They use instants to declare a perfect model of the future, one where history only exists in memories of light cones, and the future is constrained by the instants anchored upon the universe by Nous. Is the universe predetermined, or is it chaotic? Can the chaos of the universe be reversed? In a universe where time is the flow of entropy, the imaginary river of the destruction's golden ichor, Nous seeks to subvert this thermodynamic arrow of time with their instants, killing time with their timeless instants. If Nanook is the increase of entropy and the heat death of the universe, then Nous is effectively the Maxwell demon, manually sorting events so that in the universe inside the circle of knowledge will always have reduced entropy, and to do so, the anchoring of instants to the universe is one of their important weapons against Nanook, the competing model of time as the flow of entropy, in the upcoming War of Eons. Of course, as I have mentioned before, Nous Instant and Nanook's thermodynamic arrow of time is not the only concept of time being used in Honkai Star Rail. The Remembrance represents another way of understanding time, as the probability inside a light cone. With this information, we can now start to see why these three paths participated in the game of Amphoreus. Amphoreus is not a place where three paths entangle, but where three paths fight to the death. They are three competing models of time, determining the past, present, and future of the universe. The Remembrance for the romantic past in a light cone, the Erudition for the Enlightenment's present in a universe without past or future, and the Destruction for the destined future of the universe under the fiery blaze of the heat death. That said, Lycurgus actually missed one path, the one path that the writers had tried so hard to obscure by lying by omission, and that is the Permanence, the path represented by the Foundation Titans in Amphoreus. According to the Titans' Odes, before the arrival of the original Permanence dragon, Amphoreus existed in incorporeal form, probably as a bunch of memoria floating in space under the jurisdiction of the Remembrance. With the arrival of Permanence, who was probably dead, the foundation of the world was established, and Amphoreus finally had stable matter, which probably explains why the shape of Amphoreus was that of a Mobius strip. Since the start of Honkai Star Rail, the Permanence has always been affiliated with the shape of an Ouroboros and the Samsara, as can be clearly seen with the Vidyadhara life cycle, and with the Amphoreus Permanence dragon as well. In Honkai Impact 3, Nana, another scion of Permanence, further explained to us what the power of Permanence can do. It can freeze people's memories and time permanently, locking their life cycle into an eternal samsara, literally. If time is a river, then the Permanence is the power to freeze that river, turning that river into a loop for literally anyone in the general vicinity. While we can assume that each scion can be a bit different in power and scale, Blade certainly got stuck in that samsara cycle. What's also true is that in the case of Hysilens, a very distant heir to the original Permanence dragon in Amphoreus, she can still, in fact, freeze people's time as long as she wills it, as can be seen with how she trapped Lycurgus in the 3.5 main quest. Not only that, she can also lock their memories in an eternal loop with her songs, as can be seen in how she literally preserves the memories of Saridra's army in an eternal banquet in her personal fantasia. Specifically, in the Verginia world quest, we are shown that every time the memory bubbles of Apollonius tries to get out, he is reset instantly and has his memories wiped. From all the examples above, needless to say, the Permanence's concept of time is the samsara, as an endless return of the same, albeit one intrinsically tied to the earth as the foundation of stable matter in Amphoreus itself. In summary, we have four concepts of time competing against each other: the Remembrance's past, the Erudition's present, the Destruction's future, and the Permanence's eternal return. All four of them are locked in a battle to the death, expressed in Amphoreus as the struggles between the 12 factors and the heirs across the scepter's many simulations. While Lycurgus mistakenly believed that he could hijack the whole thing to make a weapon of destruction, the Irontomb, against Nous, of course, is using this as a trial and error to create a weapon against the destruction, Phainon, the anti-Nanook. Meanwhile, the Remembrance, once the original owner of Amphoreus through the Fate faction, has snuck away to return and regain control with the death of Cyrene. Yet, to the Permanence, this struggle is but a fantasia, one that they are particularly fond of. Instead of directly vying to be the winner, they had been sleeping all along, content with this fantasia, waiting for the arrival of another scion of Permanence. And in this simulated war of the eons, all these factions are not only myths. In the simulation of the Erudition, myths and the eons are but mathematical models, expressed through the Quatorzain algebraic expression by the scepter. In the 3.5 main quest, Lycurgus mentioned that he divided himself with the Quatorzain algebraic expression and also used it to maintain the barrier around Amphoreus from Polka's detection. In Chinese and as in English, Quatorzain algebraic expression just means 14 lines of algebraic expressions. However, an interesting thing to note is that in real life, Quatorzain is a type of 14-line poem, which used to be called sonnet. A notable writer for the Quatorzain format is Shakespeare, who was directly cited by Lycurgus in 3.4 through the Macbeth quotation. However, Herta also mentioned something very interesting about this fictional math. The Quatorzain algebraic expression is a mathematical logic that no longer exists in the cosmos after Aidan invented the 9-worded formula. At the same time, it is also used to formulate the space-time barrier around Amphoreus against Polka Kakamond. It just so happens that in real life, Before the advent of vector analysis, such as Minkowski's for vector, as the preferred method to depict space-time, there was another system proposed to express the four dimensions of space and time, the Hamilton Quaternion. Originally, Quaternion as a system was first described by the Irish mathematician Hamilton when he was walking over a bridge. He actually used a pocket knife to carve it on said bridge. There is now a plaque on the same bridge in Dublin commemorating his discovery. It was quite a big thing back then, applied in both physics and math. However, in the 1880s, Gibbs, who borrowed some ideas and terminologies from Hamilton, created his own calculus to describe 3D space, the vector analysis that we now use today. Since then, Hamilton's application has been limited compared to vector analysis. It is still in use for the study of spin, computer graphics, and computer simulation, though, so that's why you can see a fictional version of Quaternion being used in a computer simulation here. Naturally, like the real-life Quaternion's displacement by Gibbs' vector analysis, the fictional version of Quaternion, evidently, no longer exists in the cosmos after being dethroned by Aiden's 9-worded formula. Yet, at the same time, it is still being used by Lycurgus to create the time barrier around Amphoreus against Polka Kakamond. In high school, you have probably already learned about complex numbers in 2 dimensions. As a refresher, in 2 dimensions, a complex number has 2 parts, one real and one imaginary, correlating to its coordinate on the graph. A unit on an imaginary axis is called an imaginary unit. Hamilton's Quaternion is basically an upgraded version of this, with 1 real axis and 3 imaginary axes instead of just 1 real and 1 imaginary like in high school math. The real axis is usually mapped to time, while the other 3 axes map to other properties of the system. Together, the Hamilton aims to express the rotation of an object in 3D space over time. Hence, there is a time barrier around Amphoreus to prevent the ripples of time from getting to Polka Kakamond, a time barrier that can only be bypassed with the chronocognitive anchor, which, as you can guess from the name, literally works by anchoring our concept of cognitive time against the flow of time on Amphoreus, or, in other words, by imposing your cognitive instance against the flow of time. As an upgraded version of the complex number system, Quaternion also has conjugation, which isn't that different from high school complex numbers, just with more coordinates to juggle. A conjugate of a quaternion keeps the real part unchanged, but flips the 3 imaginary parts into negatives, effectively rotating the quaternion by half a circle. If you conjugate a quaternion twice, or rotate it by half a circle twice, you'll return to your original position. If you pay close attention to the scepter record, you'll notice that the 12 factors in the Amphoreus experiment aren't exactly the simulated paths in a straightforward way. The scepter record actually stated that they are conjugates of the 12 paths, as in, the real part is kept the same, but the 3 imaginary parts are rotated, presumably from one generation of Titan to the next. In the table on the screen, you can see that all heirs have already been confirmed to be mix and match of more than one paths. Namely, literally everyone has the golden blood of the destruction, courtesy of Chaos 666 when he committed the first murder and first attracted the gaze of Nanook. But even other than the golden blood of the destruction, there is also the issue of every Titan originating from only 4 proverbial descenders. The fate of the Remembrance, the foundation of the Permanence, the creation of the Erudition, and the calamity of the destruction. Naturally, this means that Hysilens, who inherited her Titan function from a confirmed Permanent scion, simultaneously succumbs to the nihility while having the golden blood of destruction. Similarly, Mach, who walks the path of the Trailblaze, is a child of the Remembrance, inherits her Titan function from the Remembrance looking behind Oronyx's shoulder, has the jellyfish of the Enigmata, but also has the broken mirrors affiliated with the beauty. A third example would be Aglia, who is also confirmed to be a simulated beauty, but Nestia is canonically part of the creation group from the Erudition, but at the same time, she also has the destruction's golden blood. And finally, we have our most egregious example, the Kefali core flame that Mach handed to us. In 3.4, it has been established by Phainon that the Kefali slot is very much affiliated with the destruction, but Kefali as a Titan function descended from the creation group of the Erudition, and now Cyrene and Mach have further meddled with it and turned it into a Remembrance version of the Deliverer slot. In other words, the Titans and heirs are all mix and match of multiple paths. They don't really walk in a straight line. And well, we can tell that some of them aren't very straight themselves either, to say the least. In each cycle, the Titan Quaternion and their conjugates, the heirs, are pitched against each other in a ritual called the Flame Chase Journey, all to falsify the 12 paths and to lead them to the destruction with a Quatorzain algebraic expression. Just as in real life, modern quantum physics can still be expressed with Hamilton's system, albeit in a modified version of it. In this simulation of the scepter, the 4 axes of the Hamilton Quaternion are assigned to 4 competing concepts of time in a battle royale. The past of the Remembrance stored in a light cone, the present of the Erudition codified by instants and nows, the future of the destruction signified by the thermodynamic time of entropy, and the eternal samsara of the Permanence, from which stable matter of space was born. The real definition of time in the Honkai Star Rail world building. In a way, by understanding that the 4 proverbial descendants are the 4 axes in the Quaternion system, the heirs and the titans can be understood as coordinates on the graph, with values on all 4 axes. As they are conjugated and rotate in accordance to Lycurgus script toward the destruction, their values on the 4 axes change from one generation to another, albeit the real part of the Quaternion is still maintained across the samsara cycles. In other words, each heir is a dice, determining not only the fate of Amphoreus, but also the outcome of the war among the Aeons. Of course, to correlate to the 4 axes on the graph, there are 4 factions on Amphoreus, under the jurisdiction of 4 proverbial descenders, each with their own ulterior motive and representative in the simulation itself. The first faction is the Remembrance, which is represented by the 3 fates, Oronix, Janus, and Talanton. This faction also includes Mach and Cyrene as the heirs of Oronix, albeit Mach has revolted and twisted the path of Oronix into the Enigmata instead. You can tell that Evernight doesn't like Fully much at the moment. But Mach aside, this path represents the pros and cons of Romanticism. With the Romantic movement, you can see the beauty in the past and keep it alive in your heart, but at the same time, if you lose yourself in the past and forget about the hope of the future, then you're going to get stuck in the past and might accidentally delete yourself out of existence. Exactly like in the new Golden Scapegoat game mechanics, and exactly like the fate of Cyrene. In 3.4, it was revealed that Mach was the Oronix of the 33,550,335th cycle, but she let herself be killed so that she could go seek for help beyond the sky and freeze time in Amphoreus, thereby changing the status of Oronix from Remembrance to Enigmata, according to the Titan Nodes. In 3.5, Cyrene revealed that she was made of our memories and that we used to be here before, just that when we left, Cyrene disappeared and returned to the Sea of Memories. In other words, the proper chronology between Mach and Cyrene is that Mach of the 33,550,335th cycle died and left Amphoreus. Then the MC arrived, presumably with a Stellaron Hunter, which prompted the first loop of the 33,550,336 cycle to occur, triggering Phainon's 33550,336 eternal recurrences as a result. Then, we left and forgot about Amphoreus, only to return again in 3.0 in the 33,550,336th eternal recurrence. Hence, Evernight is what happens when Mach lets herself be consumed by her past on Amphoreus as the con of Romanticism, while Cyrene is the pro of Romanticism as the version of Mach that keeps carrying on to the future even after she remembers the beauty of the past. Of course, as far as motive goes, Fully and the original Mach likely have a completely different intention from Cyrene. If Cyrene only wishes for Phainon and the heirs to have a happy romantic story, then the original Mach, as the first participant of the Amphoreus experiment, most likely functions as the goddess Eileithyia in a cave. As I have mentioned in many of my previous videos, in Minoan myth, the goddess Eileithyia is associated with the birth of the divine child, while in Greek myth, she is both the goddess who facilitated the birth of Heracles and the goddess who tried to prevent the birth of the sun god Apollo. This dichotomy in the role of Eileithyia is reflected in the role Mach has toward Phainon in the Amphoreus experiment, as both the Cyrene who wanted him to have a happy and romantic story that could carry on into the future, and the Remembrance actor who wrote up the script of Amphoreus in the first place to jail him, and everyone else in this happy dream forever, Hersher of Corruption style. Incidentally, Evernight proclaimed that she would protect the Trailblaze no matter the cost in her drip marketing, so evidently, that is the Remembrance's modus operandi the entire time for everything they want to preserve. By encasing Amphoreus in their light cone, they could preserve the history of the dead world that Amphoreus was based on, and at the same time, prevent the anti-Nanook Phainon, the Apollo of the story, from being born. The second faction is the Permanence, which is represented by the three titans of Foundation, Georios, Phagusa, and Aquila. While we know little about the original Georios who landed on Amphoreus, what we do know with reasonable certainty is that they had already died and returned to egg form by the time they landed. According to the Scepter record, they were given golden blood by Kephale and turned into a titan. The Titan Odes further claims that the Permanence's scion, Georios, created stable matter on Amphoreus, correlating to the Samsara as the real-time axis on both Amphoreus and in the Honkai star rail setting in general. Additional details can be gleaned from the meme book and the restaurant. In the restaurant event, we heard the rumor that they eat everything out of loneliness, in contrast to Tazi, who ascended out of love and loneliness, thus pointing the reborn Georios in the direction of the Veracity, whom we know is connected to Long in some way. We also know that they have timeless sight, having already seen past the Flame Chase's final plight, but they could not do anything to change the story. Or to be more precise, they choose not to do anything to change the story, if the restaurant event and the Verginia World Quest are any indication. In the restaurant event, while the plot seems to be that of a slice of life, if you take a closer look at it, you'll realize that it's actually a whole lot of foreshadowing for the real events of the main quest. At the finale Michelin star rating banquet, Mighty revealed that he has memories of being exiled, but Mighty of the 3.7 main quest was never exiled and was actually raised by his parents. Aglia further stated that this grand feast is like a tangled ball of yarn, each of us grasping a golden thread, all of them converging and intertwining here. The Aglia whom we met at the banquet was one who had already assumed the divine authority of romance and had not been able to pick up the needle and thread for a long time, but the Aglia from 3.0 to 3.5 had always used her needle and threads as weapons until her death. Thirdly, Saridra clarified to us that all of them have traveled for countless years, grasping a golden thread, so that in the end, they could all intertwine here at the banquet. Hysilens had not seen Saridra smile for a long time, because she was killed by Hysilens 1,000 years ago in the 3.5 loop, and this is their long-awaited reunion, after 1,000 years of Hysilens waiting alone. And lastly, Cyrene flat out told us that the banquet was the romantic ending she just thought of, as the ripple carrying the story forward, which we already know to be a future plot due to her adult form in the Deliver trailer. In short, this event is very much a big foreshadowing, exactly like how the Baby Seal event told us how Reaver stole the core flames to protect them all and carry them into the next loop. But here's where it gets interesting. During the event, Phainon and Mighty were locked into a contest with each other, again, competing for the position of chef in the same kitchen, in a parallel to how they both took the position of Strife and Amphoreus, as Polemos and Nikos respectively. They entered a competition against each other. Whoever cooks the better food is the winner. However, during the judging process, they were too evenly matched, and not even the panel of judges could stomach the sheer amount of food they created, until Hysilens showed up and ate everything. In the end, the final winner of the competition was neither Phainon nor Mighty. It was Hysilens. Also, the game mode after you're done with the event is called the Eternal Banquet, one that Hysilens claimed to be protecting on the side. Of course, that's not all. While you can still give a pass to the weirdness of Hysilens' role in the restaurant event's Eternal Banquet, the Verginia World Quest makes it even clearer on how suspicious Hysilens is toward the Amphoreus plot as a whole. For context, Verginia and Apollonius were a pair of poets in Saridra's army, based on the real-life Virgil and his senpai Apollonius of Rhodes, respectively. Verginia was originally born in Castrum Kremnos, but she was exiled from her homeland because Castrum Kremnos looked down on the weak and frail poet. For Apollonius, He used to study at the Grove, but he later joined Saraidra's army as an advisor. Apollonius, who, incidentally, likes the atrocious color combination of purple and yellow, something that the game went out of its way to highlight, liked to think of himself as a boulder bound to destiny, like a certain Sisyphus in the main quest. He would also like to reach the new world and stand side by side with her, like a certain someone in that one eternal recurrence back in 3.4. Meanwhile, Verginia liked to describe him as a bird flying too close to the sun and falling down, like a certain Icarus Phainon in the main quest. On the reverse side, Apollonius liked to describe the exiled Cremnoan who loved poems as a gentle breeze, like a certain Zephyro who may or may not be the navigator who loves poems back in Swarm. These two were actually secretly in love with each other the whole time, but in the main quest of 3.5, both of them died as part of Saraidra's sacrificial offering to Talanton in the Styxia campaign. In their last moments, Verginia finally confessed to Apollonius, and as they died happily ever after, Verginia read aloud the poem she wrote for him. The shadow of a tree frames the sage's back, like a boulder bearing the rings of time. The bird's song is a whisper of wind through the forest, but it cannot pass the fractures in his form. His weight presses down the bird's wings, and the stirring heart within. Hysilens, of course, never wanted the banquet to end. As a result, for 1,000 years, she immersed herself in her own fantasia, creating bubble versions of Saraidra and the entire Flame Chase army in Styxia. As bubbles, they generally aren't aware that they are only memories of dead people, eternally submerging themselves in the dream of an eternal banquet, just as Hysilens willed them to. That said, it doesn't mean that all of them are always lost in the drunken dream. As a bubble, Apollonius always develops his suspicions and tries to escape the dream, even though he fully knows that he is nothing but a bubble and will disappear the moment he steps outside the barrier of the Fantasia. Despite being nothing more than a dream bubble, he still believes himself to be the immovable boulder balancing destiny, a boulder on a cliff, bound to the world's destiny, exactly like a certain Sisyphus who also likes the atrocious color combination of yellow and purple and who did, in fact, try to step outside of the Amphoreus simulation despite knowing that he is but a falling Phainon. Naturally, as people lost in their own dreams, neither Hysilens nor Verginia was happy with his Sisyphus tendency. In every cycle, the moment Apollonius steps outside of the Fantasia and dissipates, Hysilens would use her power to reset him, delete his memories of the attempt, and force him back into the eternal banquet. But every single time he is reset, he still keeps on developing his suspicions and attempts to step outside the dream once more, stuck in an eternal loop under Hysilens' power. This is the power of the Permanence, to freeze people's memories and force them into an eternal samsara forever. Hysilens sings her song of the eternal banquet to lull people back to sleep, while Chille is but the sky firmament, preventing these memories of people long dead from leaving the dream of Amphoreus. Fundamentally, as children of the original Georios who died upon landing, they are both extensions of the will of the original long scion on Amphoreus. They, who have timeless sight, only want everyone to have a happy dream forever in the Ouroboros cycle of frozen time. After all, Lycurgus was the prisoner, but so, too, was Hysilens, as both the jailer and the prisoner of her own dream. An interesting thing to note is that Hysilens is actually another take of Hoyo on the story of the 52 Hz whale, the loneliest whale in the world. In real life, there is a whale known for singing at the 52 Hz frequency, which means that it could communicate with exactly no other whale. Since 1989, its singing has been detected traveling around the world. Since whales are generally social animals, people assume that it's lonely and looking for another whale with the same frequency. Hence, this whale is called the Loneliest Whale. Previously in Genshin, Hoyo has made reference to this whale through Chille and his whale. The guitar riff in his boss battle, Wrath of Monoceros Chille, actually symbolized the song of the 52 Hz whale. With his fate as the loneliest whale, Chille suffered from social ostracization and was rejected from his home as a child. Beneath the cheerful veneer is a heart of chaos, eternally seeking excitement from battles to avoid his past trauma, chasing after the illusion of companionship and acknowledgement from those around him. For Hysilens, her story is even closer to that of the whale. As a young siren, originally, Hysilens was the only one among her sisters who could not sing, for her voice is the equivalent exchange for her fighting progress under Talenton's judgment, just as the 52 Hz whale could not communicate with the others. Phagusa then made a trade with Hysilens, allowing her to sing at the cost of her inability to enjoy the feast while sober. Eventually, however, fate took action, and Hysilens returned to being the loneliest whale once more when her entire family was consumed by the black tides. On land, she initially could not communicate with the humans until she found her flame and fire, Saridra. Just as Chille continually seeks excitement from battles to run away from his trauma and immerse himself in the illusion of companionship, Hysilens immersed herself in the flame chase journey, the eternal feast promised to her by Saridra. Only for that, too, must end. The little mermaid must kill the prince to live on. The light and fire was snuffed out by her own hands, and Hysilens returned to being alone once more. For 1,000 years, the only siren left sang alone, becoming a prisoner of her own fantasia, losing herself in an eternal dream once more, fulfilling her own fate as the loneliest whale in Amphoreus. In other words, when we combine Hysilens' story with Aquila's function as the sky firmament preventing people from reaching beyond the sky, and if we are to take Hysilens as a parallel of the original Georios, then we can stitch together a rough draft of the original Permanence Scion's role in Amphoreus, as the loneliest whale that helps maintain the samsara on Amphoreus with their song, resetting the firmament, and every chaos memories every time they tried to breach the sky. Just as Hysilens resets Apollonius every time he tries to escape the eternal fantasia. Just as Hysilens is always the final winner at the eternal banquet. However, among the 4 authors of Amphoreus, the original Permanence's scion and half of the Remembrance faction were not the only ones who supported an eternal samsara for Amphoreus. If Lycurgus wanted to break the cycle so that the Irontomb could be born, then as self-sabotaging as it sounds, the Destruction faction also wants to preserve the cycle. After all, Phainon started the eternal recurrence in addition to the samsara cycles on his own despite wanting to escape the firmament all the same, and in the Verginia quest, it is not only Hysilens who wants to preserve the lie of an eternal banquet as it is. There is also Verginia herself, the exiled Cremnoan, the poet like the wind in Apollonius' heart, perfectly aware of the samsara, but partaking in it anyway for the sake of love. At the end of the Verginia world quest, you can go speak to the memory imprints of Verginia, where stones hang suspended and gentle winds cease. Then, she reveals that she knows everything all along, that she is but a memory bubble in an illusion, and that Apollonius has tried to escape the barrier of the Fantasia multiple times. It's just that she doesn't care whether they're bubbles or ocean currents, reality or illusion. She has made up her mind to recite that love poem to him 100 times, 1,000 times, to express that romance that deserves that response. They will sleep side by side for the first time, and countless times after, and never have to wake up from this dream again. Of course, this directly maps her to Mighty and the original Nicodor, Zephyro, who is possibly the navigator who loves poems. For context, back in Swarm, the ankle guy, whom Phainon was based on, had a second in command, a navigator who loves poems. They were part of the Alothia expedition on Lepismat in accordance with a false prophecy spread by either the Elation or the Enigmata. The navigator is also characterized by his back, which the ankle guy was really obsessed with for some reasons. When they first met, the ankle guy invited the navigator to be the writer for his memoir. This leader has always managed to succeed against all odds, and his triumphs have filled him with avarice, hubris, and an unwavering belief that he can conquer any planet and erect unprecedented civilizations. While he can get whatever he desires, he has never discovered what he really wants. Now, he extends an invitation to you, something he rarely offers. He admires you, a navigator who composes poetry in your spare time. The curiosity for destiny is not just a butterfly that alights on your fingertips, but also on his. I will join. A rare opportunity. You are willing to sacrifice some personal time for this. He discloses a secret. He is afflicted with a peculiar ailment that allows him to only retain memories of the most recent 3 days. The leader requests a favor of you, to document certain whispers about Lepusmat and remind him of them every 3 days. At that moment, you realize that this will be the greatest moment of your life. You will become his right-hand man and serve as his second mind. At the next landing, you will arrive in Lepusmat. His eyes gleam, and you are aware that he believes in the half-deciphered whispers that were played in reverse. He conquers planets. He establishes civilizations. He finds his lost self. Later on, their war with the bounty hunters triggered the rise of Tazi, which engulfed the Lepusmat system and then the entire universe in the swarm. On Lepusmat specifically, because of all the newly dead clogging whatever passed for the rebirth cycle there, exactly like Amphoreus, the nihility started to affect everyone, turning the ankle guy into a synthirster and split him into two, a particle self and an anti-particle self. One stayed in Lepusmat as a synthirstu with crooked ankles and a white crown, while the other became a nameless, without his memories. Due to a masked fool stealing his memories, the ankle guy had become a soldier imbued with joy, a self-annihilator who has forgotten how to erase itself from existence. For some time after the war with the bounty hunter, the navigator who loves poems still traveled with the synthirsta self of the ankle guy, recording the event of them meeting a lanolin worm. However, for an unknown reason, by the time the nameless of the ankle guy returned to Lepusmat, the navigator had disappeared from the narrative, leaving only a memoir behind with the synthirstu. Therefore, it is not much of a leap to assume that after his death, the navigator who loves poems was also affected by the system-wide nihility effect in Lepusmat at the time, having turned into a self-annihilator. If you pay attention to the narrative, you'll also notice that the navigator's memories were also reset several times, having forgotten his various meetings with the ankle guy several times over, the hallmark of someone under the influence of the nihility. As I have mentioned in a previous video in 3.3, Zephyro, the Lord Ravager of Nihility, is a nod to the Greek god of the west wind, Zephyrus. As a god of the west wind, Zephyrus was a suitor of Hyacinthus, together with Apollo. However, Hyacinthus chose Apollo, and Zephyrus got jealous. As Hyacinthus played discus with Apollo, Zephyrus blew his breath of death, killing the youth. And so, Zephyrus is also known as a god of death, as much as he is a god of wind. In other versions of the myth, Zephyrus is one of the gods mourning for the fall of Phainon into the river Eridanos, who is one of the inspirations for Phainon and Amphoreus. And that's exactly what happened here. Zephyro is the gatekeeper of the portal to the past, the black hole that Amphoreus was in, and at the same time, said black hole is the epitaph of Phainon that Zephyro was supposed to mourn for, in the river Eridanos of Annihility. At the same time, it's obvious that the land of the west wind is the land of Zephyro here, and it just so happens that Verginia is the parallel of said gentle wind, as a memoir writer of the flame-chase journey and a Kremnoan poet exiled from her homeland. Back in 3.2, I have speculated that the navigator who loves poems is the original self of Mighty. 3.4 has suggested to us that the eyeless lion, the original Nicodor, is Zephyro, who conducted the dismemberment ritual to Phainon just as the Styxia nymph quest scroll has told of the eyeless lion. In 3.5, with the appearance of Virginia as a parallel of said gentle west wind, as the in-simulation author of the heroic saga who only wants to immerse herself in a happy dream, even if she is fully aware she is nothing more than a memory bubble of the real thing, safe to say, she heavily supports the theory that Mighty is, at the minimum, a memory simulation of Zephyro, who was once the navigator who loves poems, who is the gentle west wind mourning for Phaeton in the river of Eridanos. But at the same time, who is the eyeless lion who keeps resetting his memories every samsara the moment he tries to escape from the firmament. After all, Amphoreus is where stone and wind stood still, the land of the dead, the once upon a time in Arcadia from Virgil's poetry. In real life, Virgil, the Roman poet that Verginia was based on, was the author of both the Eclogues and Georgics, both of which heavily inspired the story of Amphoreus. For the Georgics, it was basically a fanfic of Hesiod's work and days. Hesiod's work and days detailed the 5 ages of man, from the Golden Age under Kronos, in which the Golden Race was created, to the Silver Age, to the Bronze Age of men made of ash trees, to the Heroic Age of the Flame Chase, to the Iron Age where all morals are lost. But after the Iron Age, Virgil added a fanfic continuation, a return to the Golden Age under the reign of Kronos. According to Virgil, now the last age by Chille's Sibyl sung has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. Astrea returns old Saturn's reign, with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. Of course, Virgil politicized it and implied the new breed of men sent down from heaven was supposed to be the Roman Empire, but in the specific case of Amphoreus, the men from heaven are clearly the Astral Express, who literally came down from space. Astrea is, of course, Hyacinth, who is associated with Venus and will heal the sky, as I have mentioned in my 2.7 video. The Chillean Sibyl is no one else but Tribe, who also heralded in the new Golden Age, the Era Novi, with her mother's prophecy, and whose story bears more than just cursory resemblance to the Satyrcon's Chillean Sibyl. For more information on this, you can check my Tribe video in the playlist. And the Saturn here is obviously Kronos, the original creator of the golden race of men in Hesiod's Golden Age, the father of Zeus, and the god conveniently associated with Heracles Melkart, Pan, and Fans in Orpheism. In other words, this is where Phainon being the deliverer came from, assisted by the Astrea Hyacinth and the Chillean Sibyl Tribe. But that's not all of Virgil's contribution to Amphoreus lore. He is actually also the one who invented Arcadia as an idyllic paradise in the Greek countryside, specifically for his friend, Gallus. In real life, Gallus was one of the major Latin poets of his era and a friend of Virgil. However, not much of his work survived into the modern day, and he suffered from disgrace at the end of his life. The issue with Gallus was that he was also a military commander supporting the cause of Octavian. As the prefect of Egypt, he erected a monument for his own military achievement, which brought him the ire of the emperor. He was convicted in court, exiled, and deprived of his estate, but before the verdict could take effect, Gallus had committed suicide. In life, Gallus was known for his love elegy, with many references to his poems surviving to this day in Virgil's work. Virgil's take on the story of Orpheus' journey in the underworld, for example, is believed to be a reference to an earlier poem about the same topic by Gallus. But more importantly, Gallus himself also directly appeared as the main character in Eclogues 10, the poem from which we have the idyllic Arcadia and the goat herder Gallus. For a bit of context, at the time Virgil was writing Eclogues 10, Gallus was probably on a campaign in the Perusian War, far away from home. Back in Rome, Lycurgus, his mistress, was cheating on him with multiple people, a lot of people, including very influential ones. Thus, at home, Virgil placed his friend, Gallus, in the context of Theocritus' Idle One, as a goat herder dying from love in Arcadia. Plucking his friend from the distant war, Virgil had placed Gallus in a fantasy paradise of the countryside, where everything was peaceful, the plants were tender, the forest echoed, and Gallus was no more than a goat herder chained by love. In quick succession, 3 gods appeared before Gallus to console him: Apollo, Silvanus, and Pan, the god of Arcadia, but he was undeterred by them all. He acknowledged that the real him was kept in arms by his mad passion for the stern god of war, yet at the end, the Gallus in the poem refused to give up on love, proclaiming, "Love conquers all. Let us, too, yield to love." At the end of the poem, Gallus sat and waved a basket of willows, content to die for his love of war, but it is also here that Virgil took over the narrative of the poem. Gallus, for whom Virgil's love grows from hour to hour as fast as the green alder shoots up when spring is young, should return from the harmful shade of Umbria, which is a word play on Perusia, the city where the real Gallus was in, at the time of the Perusian War. To the friend he loved, Gallus could only urge, "Let's get up. the shade is usually harmful to those who sing. So is the shade of the juniper. The shade damages the crops. Go home full, Hesperus comes, go, little goats. So you can see, Hoyo pretty much adapted this poem and turned it into the story of Verginia and Apollonius, only changing Gallus' name into Apollonius for the quest. Apollonius, like the Gallus of the poems, was taken by his love of war and could never content with the fantasy of Arcadia across multiple resets. Opposing him was Virgil himself, who is very obviously Verginia in this quest. As the gender-bend Virgil, Verginia was the opposite of Apollonius. She was content with the false Arcadia that she lived in, and all she wanted was for him to stay in Arcadia with her, away from the painful reality of war and their deaths. At the same time, you can also see that Eclogue 10 not only inspired the story of Verginia and Apollonius, but is also the story of Phainon and the eyeless lion, the original Nicodor, who is most likely Zephyro, the navigator who loves poems, and our fourth author to the story. From Golden Scapegoat Murmuring and the Nameless Faces song, we already know that Amphoreus is actually Phainon's epitaph all along, and it is literally his own personal Arcadia, meant to prevent him from escaping and becoming a part of Nanook. In his dream, he became a goat herder, sleeping in his golden wheat field, dreaming that he is the Sisyphus pushing up the boulder of fate, mirroring Apollonius in Hysilens' Fantasia and Gallus in Eclogue 10. Of course, in opposition to him was the Virgil of the story, or Verginia, in this case, the gentle breeze of the west wind Zephyrus, acting as one of the authors of the heroic saga of Amphoreus, insistent on keeping him asleep in this false Arcadia, dismembering him whenever he tried to leave the barrier of the firmament, resetting the cycle of the poem eternally, all for the sake of love. In short, this is the motive of the destruction writer of the story, a poem made for the desperate love of an illusion in Arcadia. However, with how the restaurant event goes, we can already tell that things won't work out for the Pro-Fantasia writers, the Permanence Scion, Chille, and Zephyro. Because, unfortunately for them, there is a wrench in their dream, and that wrench is called Lycurgus, with his own plot of Prometheus Unbound. As the representation of the Erudition, Lycurgus doesn't actually want to continue the samsara. He only wants to win and leaves the cave. Not only that, he wants to bring everyone outside of the cave with him, for it is the Erudition's nature to live in the moment, never look back, and forever reach for the stars. Even though his method is quite questionable, to say the least, Lycurgus fundamentally represents this unending drive for knowledge of the Enlightenment movement. After all, in real life, it is the fruit of the Enlightenment that allowed humans to fly to the moon, to reach for the stars beyond the sky, and to never stop moving forward, and it is pretty much the same here for Amphoreus. Rather than drowning themselves in nihility or losing themselves in a romantic view of the past, the Erudition holds the key for Amphoreus to step forward into present physical reality, literally. In terms of Prometheus Bound, Lycurgus is analogous to the jailed Prometheus. They cancelled him, but he was totally right. That said, as a romantic work, Prometheus Unbound did not let Prometheus go scot-free. In his story, Percy Shelley depicted Prometheus as remorseful for rejecting nature, struggling in agony as he was separated from his wife, Asia, who was actually a mother goddess in the story. It is only when the romantic Demogorgon arose and the heroic Heracles freed him that the agony of the Enlightenment in Prometheus could be soothed away. In the end, he returned to his cave with Asia and went to sleep forever. In other words, if Prometheus Unbound holds true for the later half of Amphoreus, then Lycurgus is going to have a heel-face turn with the power of love, find a compromise between his Enlightenment idealism and the romantic sentiment of everyone on Amphoreus, and he's going to help us dethrone the Sky Father, Fuli, as Zeus. And then he's going to go back into the cave, content with his new compromise between the Enlightenment movement and the Romantic movement, which should be represented by her to here. An interesting connection can be made here between Lycurgus, Anaxa, Otto from Honkai 3, and Dator from Genshin. Zandar's name is probably based on Zandik, which means heretics, atheists, Manichaean, or Zervanite, which is a form of Zoroaster. Zandik is also the real name of Dator in Genshin, while Zervan was the first Peri born of Simurgh and Sumeru. As a religion, Zervanism was a branch of Zoroaster, which was originally founded by Zarathustra, of the Thus Spoke Zarathustra fame. This was directly referenced multiple times by Hoyo across different games, in the magazine interview for Anaxa, directly in the main quest for Lycurgus during his boss fight, and in the cutscene for Otto when he planted a tree for Kaelin. You can see pretty clearly that all of these characters have the exact same theme of having multiple segments of themselves and, well, some sort of tree planting or tree burning project. But not only that, all of them also have a plot involving losing their faith in God and regaining their faith in God again. In Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the founder of Zoroaster, Zarathustra sat under a tree, but his enlightenment is that God doesn't exist, slowly losing faith in God and leaving the tree at the end. Hoyo's take on this story so far is to subvert Nietzsche and make Zarathustra find faith again after a long journey of redemption. For Otto, after losing his god, Kaelin, he lost his faith and conducted many atrocities in her name, but in Thus Spoke Apocalypse, he finally returned to his roots, choosing to sacrifice himself so that he could plant a new branch where his god, Kaelin, lived on. For Anaxa, after losing his sister to the Black Tide, he lost his faith and conducted many experiments so that he could see her once more, but in his youth, he received proper guidance from his teacher, Empedocles, so he never went as off the rail as Otto, but he still became a blasphemer of the divine, still doing a lot of questionable experiments on other people's souls and his own. It was not until 3.2 that he managed to find his faith in the flame chase again, choosing to sacrifice himself so that he can sow the seeds of suspicions in the new world. For Dator, he is a Zandik, one without faith, but in Sumeru, one segment of him has destroyed the rest. Next, he's going to burn a tree so that another for the Tsarits's new world can be planted, so still tree planting, splitting his souls, and finding faith again in his new tree. For Lycurgus, he is currently at the stage where he has lost faith in his god and has split his soul into 9 pieces, but both Prometheus Unbound and Hoyo's historical take on Zarathustra heavily suggests that he will regain his faith and play a critical role in connecting Amphoreus to an imaginary tree. Yes, that's totally possible, by the way, thereby making it real, but of course, he will have to return to the cave for that, in accordance to the Prometheus Unbound plot. Personally, I suspect that if he survives Amphoreus, then he will probably join Herta's research group. She is looking for a 5th member that can bypass Polka's interference, and last we heard of that, she was planning on inviting Ruching too. However, since in 3.0, her experiment was comedically interrupted again, whatever help Ruching too had given her probably didn't work out in preventing Polka's Rube Goldberg mechanism from messing up her experiment. Well, it just so happens that Lycurgus conveniently holds the tech to prevent the ripples from getting out to Polka, so what's with how 3.0 started with the Amphoreus business interrupting Herta? I think that whatever happens at the end of Amphoreus, Herta will find a way to secure her time barrier against Polka, either from Lycurgus Scepter, if he doesn't survive Amphoreus, or by recruiting into her team, if he survives Amphoreus. In the Chirping Secret quest at 80's Alicia and Daylight Styxia, after you complete the quest there, you will receive a golden apple as a reward. It is the treasure at the end of the adventure, and the benchmark of a Legends prologue, born from the brand new structure born after the Era Nova. Influenced by Amphorean sagas of heroes, it presents itself in the current space-time as a golden apple. To give civilizations their time, to give years their life. In other words, the fruit of time contains, literally, time that can be planted in another era as a new branch of the tree, capable of turning memories into reality. In Honkai 3, this is analogous to Otto's tree planting for Kaelin. In Genshin, this is the parable of the tree, enacted by Ishtaroth for Makoto. Your one thought shall echo through eternity. And so the gardener planted the branches in his backyard. In an instant, the slim branches grow into a new tree, and the new tree spirit was a continuation of the past one. For it is the god of moments who is able to take seeds from this moment into the past and the future. For Amphoreus, this golden fruit of time, or the golden apple of wisdom from the Garden of Hesperides, is currently in the possession of Aglia. In the restaurant event, Aglia could connect the memories of everyone from the past to the present across multiple eternal recurrences. So, needless to say, she will be responsible for the new fate of Amphoreus. Albeit, like always, her humanity will be the price to be paid, and she could never return to being a seamstress again. For Quatorzain and Cypher, they will weave a new dream, or new samsara for Amphoreus, but both of them will have to stay in the nether realm as the price. More specifically, Trivi's prophecy in her Myriad claimed that Quatorzain will be trapped in the past, probably in a similar way to how Polixia died on turn 1 in 33,550,336 cycle. For Cypher, she, along with Aglia and Hysilens, will discard their humanity as the price. For Anaxa and Hyacin, both of them will forfeit their life. Hyacin, as we all know, will merge with the firmament, but that firmament must be destroyed for Amphoreus to move forward into reality. As for Anaxa, he's most likely going to complete the Zarathustra route and, together with Lycurgus, helped connect the seed of Amphoreus to the imaginary tree, which would necessitate him stepping out of the cave first to do so and dissipating as a simulation. Altogether, as the titans under the creation group of the Erudition, Nestia, Circes, and Kephae are all poised to bring Amphoreus into, well, the creation. Each version of Nestia, Circes, and Kephae might follow different paths to this creation of new life, but for the last generation of these titans before Amphoreus' birth, Aglia, Anaxa, and Cyrene are poised to work together to make the dream of Amphoreus into reality, fulfilling Prometheus' role in the anthem of creation. For Cyrene, while Trivi's Myriad left her out, the restaurant event has told us that yes, she will be the ripple carrying the story of Amphoreus forward. In the final Banquet, she was conflated with us, so the 3.5 Deliver trailer and Nameless Faces trailer likely hold true. She will be the new deliverer in Final Recurrence, holding the Remembrance modified core flame of Kephae and carrying everyone's memories forward into the romantic ending of the heroic saga instead of Phainon. As our memo sprite, she is made out of our memories of the real March, so most likely, she will just return to being a part of March's memories. After all, every meme will return to the heart of Oronix, and that Oronix has always been March, the person who exists outside of the story, which isn't unlike Phainon's eventual fate post-Amphoreus. For Phainon, he is set to become the anti-Nanook, the proverbial Neus to Nanook's Nicodor in 3.1. Since 3.0, it has been hinted multiple times that he is but a memory split of Nanook, spent back in time to Amphoreus so that he could remain in his dream, in his homeland of Arcadia. But of course, the dream must end, and Phainon will wake up, exiled from his homeland once more. Some will become utterly alone. After all, he has his own magnum opus plot to play. If he doesn't wake up to merge with Nanook to change the meaning of the ending, then, well, the universe would enter into the heat death as defined by Nanook instead of being reset in another eternal recurrence as defined by the finality, and we already know that the finality ending is the real one. It isn't for nothing that Phainon is literally the one who keeps resetting Amphoreus every single samsara and eternal recurrence. For Amphoreus to become real, for the past to move into the future, everyone will have to pay their own price. For all the Chrysea's heirs as a whole, history will forget them as humans, the world will forget them, and the only thing remaining will be their stories as the inhuman gods of the new world.
Huh? I've gotten smaller, and there's more of me! Get ready. It's time for us to head out with the west wind.
Toward the proverb revealed by fate. Go, and seek the children of humanity with golden blood. Like you, some will be trapped in the past. Some will bury time itself. Some will discard their humanity. Some will forfeit their life. Some will become utterly alone. Some will lose everything.
Everyone will have to pay a price, But what will happen to the one who has long lost their name and face to the nihility? The river of the dead? In Virgil's poem, Gallus could return home to Virgil's Arcadia under the light of the Hesperides, but in reality, Gallus never did. Apollonius was reset, and he listened to Verginia's love song, but even Verginia knows that that cannot last forever, as it was Apollonius' fate to be the boulder balancing the scale of destiny. In 3.0, the world Quest I Once Was in Arcadia was released, telling us the story of Paris and Helen. Originally, Helen was a Titankin from Castrum Kremnos, and Paris was a human from Okima. In their own version of the Trojan War, Paris convinced Helen to run away to Okima with him and marry him in search of Arcadia. At first, Helen was not convinced, but she was persuaded by Paris, slowly falling in love with Okima, with him, with Arcadia. However, when the war arrived at Okima, the cowardly Paris betrayed Helen, intending to run away with only himself. Alone, heartbroken, Helen fought against her own kins to protect a city that doesn't love her, to keep her promise to a man that tried to sever their threads of romance, still in search of his idea of Arcadia. In the end, as she dragged her wounded body back to the ruins of Castrum Kremnos, she laid broken alone for 1,000 years, still asking Paris for Arcadia. At the end of her long journey, she finally returned to her eternal slumber, unable to truly die. Death doesn't even exist for her. She has merely returned to an eternal slumber, a place untouched by romance or conflict. The Arcadia of Virgil does not truly exist. Some will become utterly alone, some will lose everything. And yet, death was once in Arcadia.